I would like to start with the first question. In your work with global organizations like the UN or CIVICUS, what strategies have proved most effective in pushing for policy change?
Thank you so much for that question. Civicus is one of the smaller organizations in terms of capacity, and I think one of the things that we've been very mindful of is recognizing that we have limited capacity here in New York. And that gives us this sort of sense of understanding that whatever work we do, we need to do it collaboratively, whether that means working in the UN system here in New York, or it means working with more domestic or national, regional UN offices, multilateral institutions. And with that, our collective voice really does make a big impact when we're looking at policy change. As you might know, the UN system is structured in a way where civil society organizations or individuals cannot go and take decisions at the institution, but it is member states who are taking these decisions. But member states also have a million things to do. They're diplomats, they're mission staff, they have multiple things to do. So, to make sure that our voices are heard, we need to collectively take it forward, backed by evidence, backed by research, and make sure that whichever member state that we are working with, we also hold them accountable in terms of the timeline of the work that they're doing, the priorities that they're setting, the agenda setting that they're doing whenever conversations on human rights, justice, inclusivity does come about. So I think that one point of collectively taking your voice together, making sure member states are engaged from a very a nascent process of letting them know of the challenges that we're seeing, backed by evidence, providing them recommendations based on our expert research, and then guiding them through what next is truly one of the collective ways to make sure that policy change does happen.
In your view, why is youth trust in multilateral institutions declining, and what should these institutions do to differently rebuild that trust?
Thank you for that question. And I know the trust decline in multilateralism is such a huge issue, and it's not just a conversation that's happening on social media between private individuals. It really has captured the UN's attention because the UNAT, for all of the challenges it holds, the concept of UNAT and the reforms that they are doing, one of the reasons why this reform has come about is because of these conversations that individuals are having across the world through social media on an everyday basis, that the multilateral structure is not working. And when I say it's not working, what do we understand by that? When we have an institution that is international, multilateral, because we need certain objective institutions when domestic or national structures are failing its citizens. That's how the UN came about, to make sure that we don't have war, we don't have injustice, and to learn from the past and to make sure that the future is better. But when individuals like us, when young people are unable to see that concrete sort of delivery of justice at home, they're not able to see development progress in the way that they wanted to, they do look at the international space. And this is not just for young people, this is also for diplomats working working for countries. This is also for young people who are engaged in domestic progress and development work. When the development work at the national level is not keeping up with what our demands are, we look at the international space. And when the international space is unable to answer that question and help us with that development, help us with that progress, make sure that injustices, war, global crises, one after the other, are not resolved quickly, I think that's when we start losing trust in the multilateral process, because then you're like, okay, well, the domestic or the national or the regional spaces weren't working for us. So we look out to the international space and that's not working for us. So what do we do next? Where do we voice our concerns and where do we go where we are actually heard? And I think that is such an important conversation for young people, especially, to lead, because it is our future that we need to demand for a better one.
What advice would you give to young professionals trying to break into international decision making roles today?
As someone who's under 30, and I would still like to consider myself young, as someone who's under 30, I started off in back home as a human rights lawyer in Nepal, and then slowly worked my way up into the international space. But I think, when I've been able to connect with young people in the multilateral or international spaces here, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I don't want to be shy about this because this is, I know, a big challenge for young people, is having to do unpaid internships. And I bring this up before anything else, before we talk about being heard in the rooms, before we talk about being represented equally. Work needs to be compensated. It needs to be compensated well. And I think it requires for young people to make sure, and for UN organizations to really hear out young people when we say that just because our age, is under the youth category, doesn't mean that we are open to doing unpaid internships year after year. Because what that also does is it twists who gets to do these unpaid internships, people from what country get to do it, and what level of class can happen. New York is one of the most expensive cities in the world. It is absolutely insane to expect young people to come and fend for themselves without any money. And the challenging bit is, with the visa restrictions for international people, you're not even allowed to do any other work legally, right? So it does create this unfair balance for young people from more privileged classes and privileged countries to come here and be represented, and then open doors for people of certain backgrounds. So I think we need to look at that as one of the most important things. And this is, of course, for young people to raise their voice about, but it's for the UN to hear out. And I know even international organizations have also moved policies, making sure that they are paying minimum wage, they are paying something to to international or domestic interns. So that is, I think, one thing that needs to be everyone needs to be mindful about, not just young people. But second, I think one of the things that I wanted to tell young people, especially young women, is that taking up space is not a bad thing. I think whenever we are in conversations, in big rooms, we look at our age as a disadvantage. And it can be a disadvantage, right? There are structures that don't allow young people to flourish as much, but we also need to look at the advantage of it. There are so many things young people are more savvy with. We've grown up with more technology. It's more attuned to us. We understand global challenges from a very fresh perspective. So to learn from all the knowledge in the room, but also to make sure that you are bringing in your perspective, you are not shying away from being incorrect. We all have this fear that we need to be educated, we need to learn, we need to keep reading to be correct in our views. But at times, a lot of it needs to be grounded on lived experiences. And your lived experience is not wrong. Whatever it is, you should be able to share it and, come together with others in the room to collectively decide how to move forward from it. So I think my suggestion to young people, and especially young women, women of color, is to be okay for taking up space, because this is your space more than anyone else's.
Thank you so much for sharing. Your input is really valuable.
Thank you so much.